Hi everyone, and welcome to this episode of Fan Art Friday. This week I decided to work on a drawing of the original 3 starter Pokemon. I think we're all really excited about the release of Pokemon Go. It's such an amazing game, and I think it brings back a lot of nostalgia for those of us who grew up playing Pokemon. I'm one of those, and I just wanted to be working on some Pokemon drawings this week. If you have any suggestions for Pokemon that you want to see me draw, if you have any specific Pokemon that you'd like to see me work on in future videos, then please let me know in the comments below. I read through the comments every week, and I really appreciate that you want to see me work on these drawings. So please let me know, and I'll be sure to check through the comments. I was really glad to finally be working on a drawing of Charmander, Squirtle and Bulbasaur. For the initial outlines of this drawing I used a 0.05mm sepia coloured Copic Markers pen. I absolutely love using this pen for the initial outlines. It's very friendly when you use the Copic markers over the top of it, where it doesn't smudge or blend. It doesn't cause any issues at all. Once I'd added the colouring later on in the drawing, that's when I add a second layer of outlining with a black Copic Markers pen. And this really helps to bring out the Pokemon, and it makes them stand out from the background. Also in this drawing I wanted to bring out the same comic panel effects that I've been using in a lot of my recent videos. It's so much fun to work with, and it's a great way of making the characters stand out from the page. Once the outlines were completed, it was time to move on to the colouring, and for the colouring of this drawing I used Copic markers. I started off by colouring Bulbasaur. For the initial colouring of Bulbasaur's skin tones I used a mixture of horizon green, pale blue-grey, frost blue and light crockery blue. For the colouring of Bulbasaur's eyes I used dark pink and rose red. I also used these same markers to add the colouring to the insides of all of the Pokemon's mouths in this drawing. After that, for the colouring of the seed pod on Bulbasaur's back, I used a mixture of 3 different green markers: lime green, pea green and moss, and then I added some extra shading over the top of that with the cool grey markers and black. This just helped to add some shading and push that part into the background, where Charmander was going to be in the foreground at that section of the drawing. Moving on to the colouring of Charmander, I used 2 different orange markers, orange and apricot. For the lighter toned areas of his skin tones I used apricot, and for the darker shaded areas I used orange. To add some extra shading to those areas I added sand Copic marker over the top of that, and then for the highlighted area on the top of Charmander's head I used honey. And then also for the colouring on Charmander's belly I used light reddish yellow and added shading with the sand Copic marker again. I used an aqua for the nice blue-green tone to Charmander's eyes, and then to add some extra shading over the top of that I used a Prussian blue. And lastly, to add the colouring to Charmander's tail for the flames at the end, I used honey, apricot and orange, starting off with the honey at the centre for the lightest part, and then blending outwards with apricot and then lastly orange. Then it was time to add the colouring to Squirtle. For the base layer of Squirtle's skin tone I used a light crockery blue, and then to add the shaded areas to the right side of Squirtle I used a light greyish cobalt. For the colouring of Squirtle's shell on his belly, I started off with a couple of layers of light reddish yellow. I added some sand Copic marker, and then I added some shading to that with a cool grey 3. And then for the shell on Squirtle's back I used brown and light walnut. And for the last part of the colouring of Squirtle I coloured the eyes with carmine. Once I'd added that layer of colouring to Bulbasaur, Charmander and Squirtle, it was time to add some colour to the background of this image. For the grassy area that they're standing on, I started off with a new leaf marker. This is a really nice bright green. I layered this in a way that it showed up as grass, making sure to add lots of different layers, especially to the areas where they're standing. I then used a pea green to add some shading over the top of that, especially focusing on those shaded areas they're standing in, and then adding some blades of grass in the foreground. And for the sky in the background, I wanted to keep this nice and light, and I didn't want it to distract from the colouring of the Pokemon, so I used a single layer of frost blue. Once that background colouring had been added, it was then time to focus on the second layer of outlining, and the goal of this is to make the Pokemon stand out from the background and to really push them out of the image. So I used a black Copic Markers pen, adding outlines to each Pokemon, making sure to add some thicker lines in the areas that really help to complement the shading. I also used this multiliner pen to add a thick black border going around the outside of the comic panel. After that, I then used a Uni-ball Signo Broad pigment ink white pen to add white paint outlines going around each Pokemon. This acts as another way of really making these characters stand out from the background, and it's just a nice way of highlighting them and making sure they're the most important part of this drawing. And lastly, as a final touch, I used the highlighter pen to add some particle effects to this drawing, adding some particles going over the top of the grass, and then adding some particles in front of the sky. And that was the drawing completed. Overall, this took about 3.5 hours to complete. It was really fun to work on, and I'm so glad that I finally worked on a Pokemon drawing like this. If you have any suggestions for future Pokemon drawing videos, or if you have any suggestions at all for future drawing videos, then please let me know in the comments below. If you enjoy videos like this, then make sure you're subscribed, and any likes or shares on this video are hugely appreciated, and it really means a lot to me, and it helps to support the channel so much. If you want to follow me on Twitter or Facebook or Instagram and follow along with the progress photos throughout the week, then be sure to check out the links in the description box below. And once again, thank you so much for the support on this channel. I really hope you enjoyed watching this video. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you all soon.